Hello everyone and welcome back to Age Nagash, which is a channel dedicated to Age Sigmar. Now in this video is going to be my last lore video for Flesh Eater Courts, but this one's going to be a little bit different. This is not going to be me going through the battle tome or talking about, the generic lore of Flesh Eater Courts what's out there from Games Workshop. This is something that I thought would be quite interesting to do, and this is going to be talking about the lore for my own Flesh Eater Court army that I came up with when I started Flesh Eater Courts, like when they first came out, if not before. So looking at about 2-3 years ago, something came out with this lore. However, it's also linked to the lore of my Death Army as a whole, and as I am aging the gash, I thought it'd be quite a nice time to actually talk about the own lore for my army, and who knows, it might even give you guys inspiration for your armies. The lore for my army as well, like I said, I did it like 3 years ago, along those lines, something about that. So that means that there wasn't really any lore out there for Death at that moment in time, so I sort of had to work with what I had. So it might conflict with things you have, like what's happened in the Age of Sigmar since, but I think it's pretty much okay. So essentially, I could go into loads and loads of detail about my Death Army, but I'm going to give you like the summary essentially, and it's going to, like I say, involve my Death Army, not just Flesh Eater Courts, but it does have the story of my court in it. So, firstly, there was in the realm of Shaiish, and this was long before we had a map of what Shaiish looked like, so you had to very much, just imagine, from the abstract lore. There was a great Order Kingdom, and this Order Kingdom in Shaiish, it worshipped Sigmar. So, there's obviously a little bit of rivalry between the worshippers of Nagash in the realm of Shaiish and the worshippers of Sigmar. However, as there was never a good relationship between the two patrons, when all war broke out, Nagash tasked Neferata to take this Order Kingdom. And just to be clear, this kingdom is not just like one fortress or something along those lines. It is a massive expanding empire. So this kingdom of Order was relentlessly attacked by the forces of Nagash, led by Neferata herself. And the forces of Order had basically, obviously imagine this massive kingdom. They try to fight off the invasions over time, but eventually they had to retreat back to their capital. And the battle for the capital with the legions of Nagash led by Neferata, it took days upon days to breach the many defences of Order. However, Order was eventually pushed back off its walls and fortifications to the point where it retreated through the streets of its capitals until it ended up on a large parade square in the centre. Now in the middle of this parade square was the ever winter realm gate, and as the forces of Order made their final stand by this realm gate, they soon realised that they would not survive. So what they decided to do was to go through this forbidden realm gate that no one ever trespassed into, as it led to the mountains to the north, and only the banished and the exiled would be sent through it. However, they had no choice, so the remaining armies of Order fled through this realm gate of the Everwinter and went to the mountains. Sadly though, all did not make it into the mountains, as many had to stay behind to hold back the undead, so the ones who made it through could destroy the realm gate to make sure they were not followed by the dead. Once the realm gate was destroyed, the remaining forces of Order realised that they were now isolated in the northern frozen mountains of despair, and the reason for these mountains title was not known at that moment in time, as it was just called the Frozen Mountains, but soon the second part of its name would become clear. So the forces of Order spent many times going through the mountains trying to find a way out, and eventually trying to have their end goal of taking back their kingdom from the undead. They prayed many times to Sigmar at first for them to have a help and support to strike back at the undead, and then ended up just being a case of trying to find a way to leave the mountains or provide food or water. But eventually they would hear no prayers, and they realised that their god Sigmar had abandoned them. Many moons later, they stumbled across a shrine in the mountains. It was a shrine so unique and so which seemed to be impossible to be in a place like this. And there was an inscription upon the shrine, and it spoke of great power to defeat the undead. However, what the soldiers of Order did not realise is once they spoke the incantation, it would already be too late, and they, forever onwards, would be cursed, as the shrine was put there by the great deceiver, Tzeentch himself. However, the forces of Order did not realise this at first, as they thought that all hope had been lost, and suddenly they came across a patron that actually cared for them, and actually was willing to give them the power and strength to defeat the undead, who had taken everything from them. Whilst at first they did not realise just what step they had taken upon this path, it had taken 1,000 years for these once noble soldiers of Order to become twisted and mutated and corrupted by the power of the Changer of Ways, twisting them into more likeable and easygoing forms of what the Deceitful Way deems to be the perfect image. Now no longer the once sworn soldiers of Sigmar, but now the corrupted and twisted cultists of Tzeentch that lived in the mountains of despair. The only thing they remember is the hatred of the dead that lied to the south in their once glorified kingdom. Right, so that is the first half of the story, and yeah, it's quite, like sort of vague and abstract, but that is because this was at a time when Age of Sigmar was purely abstract, and basically you might be wondering why is Tzeentch involved here, and it all basically evolved around the armies I had. So I had my Death Army, which was a very humble start compared to what it's like now, and Neferata is my favourite named character, so that is why she is obviously the leader of the Nagash's forces. And the Tzeentch was because I actually had a Tzeentch army. I had a Slaves of Darkness Tzeentch army way back, and bear in mind this is all when open play was a thing and there wasn't points, so that's why it's an Order kingdom opposed to being a Free People's kingdom or a Highborn kingdom or one of something along those lines. It's very just generic Order. So that is the story of what happened to the Tzeentch, and obviously there's been many wars and conflicts since, and that is basically the tragic tale of what bestowed the citizens of Order who lived within this kingdom. Right, okay, so then looking at it from a different perspective, now we are going to look to see what Neferata did once she conquered this once glorified kingdom. So when Neferata conquered this kingdom, she didn't just slaughter all the living and just raise them up as the undead. She, of course, is not so malice. She decided to spend the next 1,000 years enthralling the citizens, or now citizens, of this once great kingdom. And she did this by, firstly, everyone who was old enough to remember what had happened during these great wars of their kingdom, of the living versus the dead. She had to have them killed. They were slaughtered. When I say killed, they were mainly sort of food for her Vargeist. And what she decided to do with the younger generation that could not remember, all of them would be raised. Even if they came from villages that were beyond the mighty fortresses of this once great kingdom, they would be spared and they would be raised and they would be enthralled, and basically started a series of changing the way they perceive things, and basically brainwashing them to a certain extent over the next 1,000 years to make them feel like not, basically to prevent an insurgency. She killed everyone that could remember what was happening, and then the ones who were too young, they were grown up every generation since to believe that Neferata and the forces of Nagash saved their kingdom from the Tzeentch forces to the north, even that we all know that the Tzeentch forces, well, I say we all know, I know because of my story, that we know that the Tzeentch forces were actually the ones who remained, who tried to defend the kingdom. So as this kingdom, now known as the Imperial Empire of Pure Blood, and Neferata being the Queen of Blood, the Blood Queen if you like, the leader of the Legion of Blood, and this was before the Legion of Blood was a thing and stuff, so it's all quite nicely tied into that with the new law, which is nice. So now that the citizens of this kingdom, the Imperial Empire of Pure Blood, were to a state of such devotion to Neferata that they would happily give their lives for Neferata or the Empire itself, and knowing full well that once they have given their life, their service would never truly end, as they would always serve in undeath. And that she had built such a hatred for the citizens and citizens of this new empire towards the Tzeentch in the north, that they completely, absolutely rewrote history, all those sorts of things. Now, Neferata, as she is obviously very intelligent, she's the first of Empire, she's very smart, she knew that she couldn't just leave these forces of Tzeentch in the north that you never really saw too much of. They occasionally raided areas of the Empire, and this is mainly because the Empire was ever expanding. So more along the lines of the Empire was more on the offensive and occasionally came along the Tzeentch forces, and that's how they sort of came to know them to the rest of the Empire. Now, Neferata realised that, sure, it's just what seemed to be nothing in comparison to her empire. She needed to take care of it. So she decided to send one of her most powerful and effective legions there is to deal with this cult in the Mountains of Despair. And she sent her 14th Legion, which was renowned for being one of her best regiments. So this legion comprised of some of her finest generals and finest champions, sent off into the Mountains of Despair, and not through the frozen ever winter realm gate of which the forces of order travelled once before. They had to set out to track down and kill whatever Tzeentch forces there were in the Mountains of Despair. They knew this would take a long time to achieve. However, these soldiers would do anything their queen commands. It took the 14th Legion many weeks and many months, the point of years, to be able to locate any Tzeentch forces in the mountains, to the point to when they came across their first confrontation with the forces of Tzeentch, they were so unwary that when they were ambushed by the Tzeentch cultists, they lost many casualties. However, the forces of the 14th Legion were triumphant over the Tzeentch and victorious, even though they took many casualties. However, because it had taken them such a long stage to get to where they were, to finally come across the Tzeentch and fight them in open battle, they had expanded all of their supplies, all of their food, everything they relied on for the last year to get to where they were today was gone. Whatever remained was destroyed in battle. So, as horrible as it once sounded, and forbidden amongst many of their beliefs, some of the 14th Legion had to start eating the dead. It was either that or be dead themselves. And even though that they know their duty would truly not end in death and they would forever serve their queen, there would be no use to her up there on the mountaintops, far beyond the reaches of her magic. What the 14th Legion did not know, however, is that once they tasted the flesh of these Tzeentch cultists, there was no going back. They have themselves taken the first steps upon a journey there was no return from. And once they had done this, over time, they too began to mutate into new forms, turn them into what they were to be known as the Eater Courts today, as Sirloin himself, the general of the 14th Legion, now turned into a twisted vision of what he was before. And as they slowly transformed over time, there was more and more confrontations against the Tzeentch, which made them consume more of this dark magic of flesh, which enhanced their transformation. So as this is natural with the Eater Courts, to revert to these new forms once they have turned into cannibals. What also sped along the transformation is perhaps Tzeentch, the changer of ways, decided that he thought there would be a new fitting image and form for these once soldiers of Neferata to be in his own twisted mannerism. And the irony of all of this is that the Eater Courts and the Tzeentch warriors in the frozen mountains are actually truly brothers and sisters, descendants of the same ancestors, defending the same kingdom from the forces of the undead. However, now they have both been twisted by that same defeat that they both shared, and now fight each other for eternity in what is truly called the Mountains of Despair. For the state it is in, that is a truly fitting name. And although that Neferata no longer has true command over the forces, she is very happy as she achieved what she set out to do. She cared not if that regiment of the Legion of 14th would return back to a capital of the Empire of Pureblood. All that she cared about was to make sure that the Tzeentch forces in the north were dealt with. Okay guys, that's like sort of a very sort of summary of the lore behind my Death Army and the Flesh Eater Courts as a whole. I've got a lot more to it, like the sort of legions and the Nagash side, and I can go more into it in the Flesh Eater Courts, but it's quite late now and I want to get this video to you guys sort of soon as possible. But I really wanted to just demonstrate, like, this is what I came up with when there was no lore basically out there for Flesh Eater Courts, especially for, you know, well, I say Flesh Eater Courts, but also for death in general. And I sort of had to do what I could come up with, and it was actually quite nice because the initial, you know, hump of when you've got really abstract lore to come up with your own lore is like a little bit daunting. However, once you've got your basic story, you've actually got loads of freedom because there's nothing really stopping you from being really creative. And yeah, so basically at this point as well, it's like this, you know, this 14th Legion I've been talking about was actually like a legion of, you know, like 3 people basically that went forth, not like a legion of obviously like skeletons and all that, or deadwalkers or something else that's from the Legion of the Nagash, you know, battle tome if you like. They were actually the 3 people that have turned into these cannibalistic Flesh Eater Courts, obviously under the Court of Sirloin. So yes, that's basically what it is. I also quite like the irony, like I say, how it is, you know, like the forces of order tried to defeat, you know, the relentless invasions of the dead. However, there was the forces that remained had to retreat to the mountains and eventually turned into these, you know, which are now, you know, Tzeentch Arcanines, as Tzeentch Arcanines weren't a thing back then. And the other, you know, part that survived of that kingdom of order were the children. And the children have grown up, and obviously this has been like hundreds and hundreds of years since. However, the same descendants have been sent to the mountains to defeat their, you know, their own, you know, like kin essentially. And however, they've had to kill their own kin, and in this sort of like twisted tale of fate, they have ended up themselves becoming monsters, killing their kin for the rest of eternity. I really like that sort of twist in it, and like I said, I can go a lot more into detail. I've actually got a whole like structure of what a citizen has to go through, or citizen is probably a better term for it, in the Empire of Pureblood, or the Imperial Empire of Pureblood. It's like a really sort of nasty place to live basically. It's that's the image for my banners. If you see them, if you go onto my channel, you're on the PC and you go onto my homepage, and you can see my sort of, you know, I think it's a banner it's called, isn't it? You know, you've got all my skeletons marching and stuff, and actually on their standards and their banners is the Iron Cross with the Imperial Empire Pureblood blood drop in the middle of it, which is my own sort of symbol for the Empire. I've got a lot of lore to it. Like I say, I've got, you know, basically what happens when a human citizen is born. They are actually entitled straight, well I say entitled, they're actually just put straight into an enlistment process, which when they're born, if they are weak, they become food. If they are adequate, they go to do a 6-year blood bank study unit, which is also known as the BBSU. They do that for 6 years. If they are weak, again, they are sent to go to die. And when I say like died and food, they basically, you know, food for, you know, Vargolfs and, you know, Vargeist have got to eat, haven't they? You know, zombie dragons have got to eat. So, you know, you've got to turn out the meat for them. You've got to turn out and grind the flesh through the, you know, the patty maker, if you like. For, oh, I don't think they really care. I think they can eat bones. So, anyway, however, during that 6 years blood bank study unit, so again, the BBSU, what they do in that is they firstly, you know, they extract blood over time, you know, for all of the noble vampires of the Empire. They basically, you know, it's a blood bank. They store blood for, you know, times of crisis, and also, you know, to make, you know, basically let the Imperial Empire of Pureblood survive. That's partly where it gets its name from. However, during this 6 years, if any of these citizens, so these kids at this stage, if they are seen as being unique, they have, you know, like the traditional sort of ancient bloodlines or something like that going through them, not vampires but something else, or they have something a bit special about them, they go on to phase 2, which is a very sort of secretive program. Okay, and then this, after the 6 years, for the people who have basically made it through the BBSU, they go to do 4 years in the Arcane Downs, and this is basically the most night haunted part of the Empire, and it's a really horrible place full of nightmares. And these kids, who are essentially 6 years old at the time, wander around the Arcane Downs, and there's either two options. So they either hopefully survived it, or if they don't survive it, they are lost. No body is found, nothing like that. They're simply just taken by the brides of the damned. Okay, and then if they survive that, they go into 5 years of pre-recruit training. And what happens in this, if they face death, if they die within this training, bear in mind they're 10 years old, you know, so they've got a few years under their belt, so no excuses here. 5 years of pre-recruit training, like if they die, they either go to food, so, you know, like back if they died at the start again, which is, you know, if they die at that rate, they go to food, so, you know, Vargeists have got to eat, haven't they? Or they go to necromancy experiments, which is very interesting, and sort of how new creations are formed within the Imperial Empire pureblood. Okay, but if they pass the pre-recruit training, they then go into 5 years of basic recruit training. So, you know, a lot of training essentially. Now, if they die in this, they do not go to food, you know. Vargeists are going to eat, but they don't worry, there's plenty of them that die in between, you know, what happened back there. The Vargeists have got to eat. They've got to eat, but they've got enough food at this point in time. So, if they die in the 5 years of basic recruit training, they are skeleton warriors. That's how the skeleton warriors are formed within the Imperial Empire pureblood. Which for me is nice, because this means that I've got like over 160 skeletons or something, but every single one of my skeletons now has a story behind it. Every single one of them went through something, which is what I like. Especially how, you know, skeleton warriors are comprised of generally not having like much will behind them, or much sort of like feelings. And I know they did a little bit more in like Malign Portents, which is cool. There's a few cool stories are out there, but it's nice to have the stories of your own. Okay, and then if they survive this though, they then finally get their postings and their basic training is over. So no more sort of like abandoned to die and all those sorts of things. Not so much on a regular basis anyway. So they're postings. So there are several, you know, corps they can go in. Now, the postings, so you've got firstly, you've got the Imperial Blood Infantry Corps, which is the bulk of the Imperial Empire pureblood. You know, that's what most people are destined to go into that one. And you've got the Imperial Blood Cavalry Corps, which is obviously going to cover things like your... And bear in mind, this was made when, you know, Age of Sigmar was very new, so this included things like your Empire Knights, included like your Bretonnian Knights, you know, so like Knights of the Realm, all those sorts of things, included, you know, Blood Knights, all those sorts of things. There was a hierarchy involved essentially. And obviously not cool like Bretonnian Knights in my lore, but, you know, those models basically. Or I don't think there even is Bretonnian Knights, is it? Like Knights of the Realm, whatever. Okay, and then the next one you've got is the Imperial Blood Armoured Corps. So this would be your steam tanks basically, and then whatever Games Workshop would come out with at some point. And then you've got the Imperial Blood Shooting Corps, which is things like your, you know, the handgunners, skirmishers, things like that. And then you've got the Imperial Blood Artillery Corps, which are, you know, your Hellblaster volley guns, cannons, your great cannons, your mortars, and your Hellstorm battery. You know, things like that. Basically your Ironwood arsenal of today, which wasn't back in those days. Okay, and then the next one was the Imperial Blood Engineers Corps. So this was like your, you know, like your Imperial Engineer, those sorts of things, you know, have that. Because I really wanted the Empire Engineer on Mechanical Horse, but unfortunately I don't make that model anymore, so I missed out on that. And then you've got the Imperial Blood Magic Corps. So this was essentially going to be all the different type of wizards you can get, basically in the Empire Army, and you know, necromancers and all those sorts of things. So it was like different categories, and if you're wondering how they'll get the postings, it will depend on their assessments throughout their training. So I've got this on a diagram as well, so I can put that on a future video if that's something you'd like to see. But yeah, so basically this video is just me explaining to you the lore behind my death. It's a very summary. I've got a lot more in depth than this, but I wanted to sort of get out there. So I am, you know, like, you know, obviously the channel is Agent Nagash, and I thought might as well share my narrative behind my armies too. And as it's got the flesh eater courts in it, and I really like the creation I've done for it anyway. The sort of like, you know, like I say, the irony of the despair and the tragic tale of how they came about and how they are now destined to fight their kin for their end of the days, betrayed by the undead. So, yes, guys, I hope you've enjoyed this. If you've got lore behind your army, please let me know that in the comments. It'd be absolutely awesome to hear. Because I don't know about you guys, but for me, if I do an army, I have to come up with my own lore from it. because I just find it so much better when you're basically, you know, moving these plastic models across the board. When you go, yeah, this guy might be like a small plastic model, but actually he's called, you know, Lord Blutstein, and he is, you know, like the leader for me of like the Imperial Blood Infantry Corps. So yeah, it's just, you know, really sort of adds to it for me. Anyway, so guys, I hope you've enjoyed this video. If so, please like, subscribe and comment down below, as that does all help me massively, of course, and it's absolutely free for you to do so. I will probably, the next video I'll be looking into see how Patreon will work and go that route, and just basically do a Patreon video and sort of explain what I've learnt from it, and see if you guys are interested. If you are, please let me know. And then after that, we'll be getting back to the Flesh Eater Courts, and we will be doing we'll be going more into the gameplay now. So what I'm going to do with the next videos of the Flesh Eater Courts, they're going to be shorter videos. You know, there might be up to 10 minutes sort of videos, maybe 5 to 10 minutes, something along those lines. They'll probably maybe be longer, because I'll probably ramble on for ages, because the Flesh Eater Courts are my baby, of course, and I want to spend the most time on them than any other channel there is out there. I don't care if there's someone out there with tens of thousands of subscribers. Of course, that's fantastic. However, this is my army. I'm going to spend as much time as I can on it. And what I will be doing in those shorter videos, I'll be going, right, okay, this unit here, Crypt Ghouls, let's talk about them for the whole video. Let's do the lore. Let's see where they are in the game. Let's see what they do, and then let's see the best way to use them. And yeah, it will just be pretty cool. And I think, firstly though, before I do sort of the unit videos, it will of course be like the Allegiance ability videos, so spells, all those sorts of things. We'll get that dusted. And then after that, it will be the Skaven. Rest assured, as the Skaven are lovely, lovely, you know, creatures. I mean, I had, because obviously I've got my Skaven army and I've messaged a mate earlier, and he's got his Khorne army, but he hasn't really used it much because he's been using his Deepkin. And he said his Legion of Blood is always ready to slaughter, and I was saying his Legion of Blood has got fat now, as it's just been sitting around not doing anything. And then he said that's better than having the Legion of Runaways. And I said, what, are you referring to my Skaven as a Legion? What, these absolutely crazed, paranoid ratmen that occasionally agree not to stab each other in the back? That's a really glorified way to sum them up as a Legion. But yeah, so it'll be the Skaven, and then after that, whenever we get to it, it will be the Free People, as that was the one that was suggested by the runner-up for the giveaway, which I very much looking forward to do, as I've got Free People lore in this lore video here, haven't I? So it'd be quite cool to do. And this was planned to be quite a short video, as I had to go to bed basically, but it's got a little bit longer than this. However, I very much enjoyed talking about it. I hope you guys have enjoyed it, and if you had, like I said, like, subscribe, comment down below. That's absolutely fantastic when you do that. So I thank you very much for watching this, and remember, until next time, Nagash is all, and all is one in Nagash.